In this post for how to paint a terracotta pot, I'm going to use Burnt Umber in Folk Art Multi-Surface and Pueblo in the same Folk Art Multi-Surface. I may use Autumn Leaves, I'm not sure yet, and a touch of white for highlighting. And this is my 3/4 inch flat brush that I link to in my blog post on my favorite tools and brushes that I like to use. This is my surface. It's a 1x10 board that I cut to 11 3/4 inches long, and even though they call them 1x10s, they're only 9 1/4 wide. I've painted it black, base painted it black, but you can use a black canvas or whatever you like. I'm just letting you know what I used for this. Now I'm going to put my pattern towards the center. I'm going to use just the one pot for this one. And I don't want it all the way to the bottom. I want it to be kind of like an inch or two above the base. And I think it's pretty straight. And I'm going to use a white piece of transfer paper, graphite. So here's the white one instead of black like you would use for on a lighter surface. And forgive the splotch there. I accidentally got my transfer paper and some paint and then smeared it, but that's no big deal. Okay, and then you take your stylus, which I should have right here. My stylus. And I'm going to just run it along the pattern. And you'll be able to see the white line there. It's faint, but it's there. I may need to use a little more pressure as I go along. Now the tape keeps it firmly in place so that I don't have lines skewed up wrong. Now you're certainly welcome to freehand this, and a lot of times I do, but you know, a lot of people like to start with a pattern. Now this is not perfectly in the center, and that's okay. It doesn't matter. I'm pretty easy going with things like that. Now we're going to start with a white undercoat because especially with craft acrylics, the reddish colors are not always opaque, and to get the vibrancy that you want, you need to undercoat with a white paint. So I'm just going to fill in with white. It doesn't have to be perfectly perfect because you're going to go over this with the terracotta colors for the pot. Now I am a little further away from this than I normally would be, so I'm a little less meticulous, but you can be more steady or what have you and get it closer to you. And a lot of times I would turn it to a comfortable angle, but I want to keep this in the camera. So I'm not worried about getting it perfectly up there against the edge of the top of the pot where it has a ledge there, because that's going to be shadowed anyways when I'm done. And I just try to get it worked in there as best I can. You can be, like I said before, more precise if you desire. And if you want the pot to come down a little further, just pull the white down a little bit. Now we're going to let this dry. And if we need to go over it again to make it a little more opaque for a background, we can. I'm just going to proceed forward. Once it dries, I'm going to go ahead and do the terracotta color. Now the white base coat has dried, and it's not completely opaque. You can see some of the black through it, but that's okay. And now over here to the right, let me see if I can squish it a little bit closer in. I am loading my brush with the terracotta, and I'm just going to carefully follow the strokes from before. It's a little bit on the dry side, so I'll really load and stroke it as evenly as I can. And this is a rectangle, so that I can do just a long straight stroke. You can see it's dragging. but that's okay. I'm just going to fill it in. I'm going to try to keep that as straight as possible. Now another trick, if you want crisp, clean lines, is to use painter's tape and tape around the edges, and then your lines will be crisper. But I like the more artistic, I call it, effect of them not being absolutely perfect. Now you just keep filling in. Can you hear my hawk out there? He's probably being chased again by a hummingbird. I caught a hummingbird chasing the hawk away from their nest the other day, and it was quite the sight to see. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of run my line that way. And along the bottom edge you see some white showing. I'm not too concerned about some white peeking through or around it, because that kind of adds a little highlight around it. Okay, so it's at a point now where that will lift if I paint any more on it. So I'm actually out of the paint, so I'm going to put a little more Pueblo onto my palette paper here, and I'm going to just come along the top edge. Now the top doesn't have to be square. You actually can make it dip a little bit towards you. And what I mean by that is I'm kind of making an arc, because this is a round object. They're not square. And unfortunately I got it too square, but I can come back later and I'll show you with shadowing how we can take care of that. Now the idea of this pot, or why I'm showing you how to do this pot, is because with many of my other flower tutorials, like my lavender, how to paint lavender, or even, well, any of them, you can put them in a pot. I can paint lavender now, or lilacs, hydrangeas, daisies, you name it. I could put those in this pot. So I'm at a point where I'm just going to leave it to dry now so I don't lift up any of the paint, and we'll come back and put in either another coat in areas where I think it needs it, or we'll do some shadowing and highlighting, or both. Well, instead of just telling you to tape along the edges, I'm going to go ahead and show you for those that really like sharp edges. I'm using frog tape. I really like the frog tape for my painting projects. And I'm just kind of going along and making a straight line. You notice how it kind of dips there, but that's okay. And then I do shorter pieces for along the other edges. Overlapping as I need to. I need to do a square piece there. A lot of times I would do like this edge like this, and then like this, and then I would come in and paint that section. So I'm going to grab my brush. And this paint's a little on the thick side, so I'm add a little bit more water. Load my brush well over here. I'm just loading it up. And then I would just come along and paint it. Now when you put your paint down, you really want to rub your finger along the edge. Sometimes I use a credit card, and that really makes that edge tighter. And so I've got that painted on there. You could have done this with the white undercoat as well. I'll leave that section on. I'll take off, these two sections. Throw that away. And then I would come along. I would let that dry a little bit, but I'm impatient right now to get this going. So I'm going to do this. in the bottom. Now, like I said, these are rounded items, so I'm not real precise and crisp edges, but I know some people do like to have things a little more precise. So then I would just come along. Now with these edges taped down, you don't want to go over that way. You want to come this way, pull from the tape side towards the center or parallel with it. So let me show you again. I'm loading my brush with a little bit of paint, and I would just go up like that. And there you have it. And then you just pull off the tape while it's wet, unless you wanted to do another coat. And that will give you more precise lines when painting your pot. Or there's also stencils out there. If you wanted to do like a ton of signs or something that had Terra Cotta Pots as the base of your plants, stencils could be an option for you. I prefer not having stencils. It just is quicker for me, but a lot of people, it's a good route. So now we see that still quite a bit of white on the top. Now normally I'm not going to really mind about this because the plants are there's going to have a little overlay there, so I don't really worry much about that. And if this bothered you, like a white edging here, you could come in with your black. Let me see if I have a black. I do. So, and with a liner or small brush, you can just come in alongside the pot and fill in. So that's just a couple options for you to neaten it up if there was things that bugged you about having the undercoat showing like that. Or you could put, like on this part here that's showing some white, you could put like a bud fell down or a leaf or something like that. Okay, so we're going to let this dry again, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how I shadow it, highlight it to give it some more dimension. Now it really comes in handy when you want to add the details to have an inspiration piece. So I here have a pot that I can see and look at to kind of do my shadowing and highlighting. I had this out in the sun to dry. It's pretty hot, so I'm trying to get it to cool off. So while that's cooling, I will show you how I'm going to load my brush. Here I have a blending gel. You can also use floating medium. Folk Art has both. Oh, let me reach over for the floating medium. Here's floating medium. This is blending gel. Now, the floating medium will work just as well. You just have to be more careful with it because it will lift the paint if you overwork it, but the floating gel will not. So, I have my 3/4 inch brush, and I have my burnt umber. Well, that's dried from yesterday. Burnt umber. I don't need a lot, so I'm going to kind of shadow along the edges or one edge and along under here and maybe along the top. So I'm loading, let's see if I can get this in here for you. I'm loading with the floating gel in my brush, and then I'm going to come and just kind of work it into my brush. You see how it's fading along there? I want that for right along this rim. So you're casting a shadow under the lip of the rim of the top part, you know, the part that's now, truth be told, if I was doing this accurately, this would have a little bit more of a dip in it because it's rounded. And then I'm going to do the same along the top. I'm going to go back over to my palette paper, and I'm just going to go in the part that I had on worked it in. I'm not going to go into more paint or more blending gel. And then I'm going to go along the top of this pot because the plants and stuff in it are going to cast a shadow. Just, not the very top, but just under the top. Along the top edge. And you can try to make it then rounded there. Or you can do straight. It's not a big deal because, as I said before, a lot of times the plants will be coming over it. Now, on this part, I'm going to shadow along a side. You can choose if you want to choose a light source. That's just a little too stark for me, so I'm just going to rub some of that out. Now I could do one side and act like a light source is coming from this side, or I could do a little bit on both sides. And if you want, if you find a spot that you have overdone it and you want to take some off, I'll take a dampened sponge or paper towel and I'll just clean it up. Now that's got a damp spot on it, so I'll let that dry. And I'm just going to kind of bring in some shadow along this side. Maybe pull in a little bit. You see how faint it is? It's easier to go up than to take away, unless you want to get that damp paper towel in. And you just add a little bit more as you think it needs it. Got that little too much gel in there, it's bubbling. And if you wanted to go underneath the pot, you could. It doesn't really show up on the black, but on a dark surface it would. Now I'm going to go into some, I'll do it, there is white on there already, but I want to do like a light edge. If you look at my pot, the top edge is light. You see that? So I'm kind of going to put that in. Now, over here on my palette, I've got the color that was the terracotta color, which is called Pueblo, and I'm just adding a touch of white to it because I didn't want stark white there. I wanted to create a rim with a lighter color of the terracotta. And I'm going to use that color. I'm going to go into some blending gel now. I've got that color on my brush, that lighter color, and I'm going to kind of put a highlight in right there. And maybe along the lower edge here. Not underneath, there's the underneath, but along the lower edge. And I might make this over here be a light source. So decide that that's going to be a light source. So let's see how it's a little lighter there. Now I could have shadowed over there and then just had my highlight here to bring it forward. See how I jump around for you there? So I could also decide, oh, I want a shadow on this side, so I'm going to shadow this after all. Now I had some little mossy stuff, green stuff on my pot. And if I want to emulate that, I can pounce on a little bit of green, kind of mix some with the burnt umber to tone it down a little bit, like a very olivey green. So, or I can do another little trick, and I'll go ahead and share that here. So I have a toothbrush. This is an old toothbrush that's worn out, and I dipped it in water. So it's got some water in it, not too much. And then here's some thicket on my palette paper. And I'm just kind of making it an inky consistency. I don't want it too thick. And then I will take a piece of paper and test this on, and I don't have a piece of paper close by. One moment. So here's my piece of paper. And I'm going to take, you can do this with your thumbnail, which you do have a little bit more control but it makes a mess of your nails unless you put on gloves. So I have another brush here, and I'm just going to drag my paintbrush over it. And you see the splatter there? You kind of want to aim it, so you get as close as you can, but you don't want big splotches. You want little ones. So I have little specks going on there. Now if you wanted to protect the other around, you can. You just lay down paper around the edges. And so now you have the little green flecks in there. You could also pounce a little bit on there with your scruffy brush or a sponge, but I didn't want it to be too standoutish, so I just go ahead and do a little bit of touch of the green with the toothbrush trick, which is, they call that fly specking in decorative painting. And there you have your terracotta pot. And like I said before, you could fix the black along the edges if that bothered you. So this can be used for many types of paintings. You could do this on a white background, or a wood look background, like my video on how to paint faux wood, or many other types of things. You can make a sign out of this, like add wording up here, and you could add a frame, inexpensive homemade DIY frame, which I probably will do something like that. I'm going to shadow that a little more. I've got the blending gel and a little bit of the on my brush. Just a spot. Just a touch. There we go. And you could do this in many ways. I have the pattern, which I will post on the blog in my resource library, and it has 2-size pots. So you can do 2 together, you can do 3 together, you can do, you know, a long board or canvas, and do whatever you like. So there you have your easy to paint terracotta pot.